Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, and that's talk specifically about a DCC application. In this case, Lightwave 3D, and taking character animation from Lightwave 3D and moving that over to Unreal Engine. Now, the reason for this, and I don't really care whether or not you don't like Lightwave or whatever, that's not really the point of this video, not the conversation I'm even going to engage in, so whatever. But the point of this is literally because Lightwave 2019 just came out. They added some Unreal Engine specific features, which is great. I'm glad they're doing that. But what it did in the community is kind of, show some misconceptions about Lightwave and Unreal Engine compatibility. Now, there are some things that won't transfer over, and we'll get to that as we go through the video. But you can take character animation, and that will show up in Unreal Engine just fine. And I think that's what really a lot of people that I saw were worried about. Like, I saw people talking about, whether or not IK and whatever would come through and all this other kind of stuff. With the bridge tools, no. But that's because the bridge tools don't currently, at least, handle character animation. And there's probably, I obviously can't speak for new tech, but my base assumption is that's because Unreal Engine handles animation vastly differently from how Lightwave does. And so, it would probably take time to kind of work out the kinks of actually supporting that. I am, for this video, using Lightwave 2018-6. I can't remember if there was a 2018-7 or not. I haven't checked, but for everything that I need to cover in this video, 2018 is fine. I don't have 2019. If NewTek wants to send me a copy of 2019, I'd graciously accept that. But for the moment, I'm on Lightwave 2018. So some of this may be kind of out of date, but this should also help the people who are still on Lightwave 2018 anyway, who might feel forced, to upgrade to 2019, but may not necessarily have to. And I'm not trying to say don't go buy 2019. That's not my point. Usually, if you can use the latest version of a particular piece of software, specifically when it has been geared towards supporting a specific task you want to do, I mean, it's something worth looking into at least. But without further ado, let's just kind of break down what we're looking at here, and then get that over to Unreal Engine. So what I have here is a very simple character that I modeled, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago, specifically for bringing animation over to Unreal Engine. So it's when I first decided that I really wanted to do cinematics within Unreal Engine 4. I have been using Unreal Engine prior to that, and had been using Unreal Engine 3 as well, both professionally and as a hobbyist. And so what we have here is just some really simple animation on its head and these kind of doodads on its back, just to kind of emphasize that there is animation. We're using a targeting rig for the pistons for the neck. The character itself doesn't have any bones in it. It's just nulls. Bones will transfer over. The nulls will turn into bones when they go into Unreal Engine, because Unreal Engine will only drive characters like animation with bones. And there are some rigging capabilities within Unreal Engine, but it's not meant for like building a character from scratch. It's really more for things like characters walking on uneven ground, and allowing for creating some variation in where like a foot can go and that kind of stuff. So that's the rig. It is very simple. I'm not a character artist, so don't criticize me too much. There is IK on the character, but I'm not currently using any of those features for this test. So we want to go save, export FBX. We'll give it a location where to land. As you can see, I've done many takes of this video. And so let's talk about our FBX exporter just for a little bit. Make sure you're on the latest version of FBX that you have. So I'm assuming that there's a newer version for Lightwave 2019. If you're Lightwave 2018, obviously we're doing FBX 2016. We want to grab our models, obviously. Any morphs that you might have. If you have subdivided geometry on your model, selecting mesh type subdivided will freeze that mesh at that level, whatever you have it set to. In this particular video, I am bringing over materials, mostly so I can talk about them in the next video. I'm not covering materials in this video. Just know that you're likely not going to use your Lightwave materials at all within Unreal Engine. Maybe one as a starting point, but after that, most likely you're going to want to switch over to Unreal Engine's method of handling similar materials on a mesh. Embedding your textures in this scenario doesn't matter. Unreal Engine will send over, or will take Lightwave textures that I believe are in the layers for the standard material. I do not believe that it will send it over for anything else. So anything if you're using nodes, I've never noticed those textures come over. So again, this is another reason why you're unlikely to be bringing your materials over to. It's just another reason. Smoothing groups, yes, even though in this version of Lightwave, remember we're using 2018 here. Smoothing groups don't exist. However, having this checked on gives the mesh a quote-unquote smoothing group that Unreal Engine will see and think that is your smoothing groups. All it's really going to do is suppress an import warning. It's not even an error. It won't prevent you from doing anything. It just show up on your import kind of log. Collapsed materials is good if you have the same material spread across multiple layers, object layers. Merge UVs should work. I noticed on this particular model that one of my UVs wasn't merging. I'm leaving it on anyway. Do not use Unity 3D mode because that will make your animation import on the wrong axis. The last time I did it, had Unity 3D mode on, the character was like it was facing down in a puddle type of thing, like lying flat on its stomach. So don't have that checked. Cameras, I have to do some research in this. Right now I can't get cameras to import. I'll have to see if that's just a particular bug with this version of Lightwave. See if someone who has 2019 can try importing cameras into Unreal Engine. Lights, don't bother. 2019, you could argue using Bridge that you could set up your lights. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily the best idea to bring your lights over from Lightwave, but if you're just starting out with Unreal Engine, I mean, it's a feature that, could be valuable, at least in the short term. Animations, definitely. That's the point of this video. We're bringing our animation over. And, of course, we want to bake our motion envelopes. Don't bother scaling the scene. Lightwave scene and Unreal Engine scene work simpatico, no problem. So no scene scaling is necessary. One Unreal Engine unit is equal to 1 Lightwave centimeter. And in Unreal Engine, 1 Unreal Engine unit is equal to 1 centimeter. So they are 1-to-1 as far as all this is concerned. And so with that set, let's just hit OK. It's going to bake out our animation. Cue Jeopardy theme. If I wanted to get copyright flagged for this, I'd play it for you, but I won't. Okay, we're done. And we're going to hop on over to Unreal Engine. I'm going to right-click in the content browser down here. We're going to create a new folder. It's lagging for some reason. And I'm going to call this Lightwave to Unreal, because that is the name of this tutorial. And we're going to do the same thing. Right click, import our game assets, and we're going to grab our newly saved FBX file, and we're going to load. And it brings up our FBX import options for skeletal meshes. Now, what a skeletal mesh is, and I'm going to try to cover as much nomenclature as I can, while at the same time trying to keep this fairly quick. But a skeletal mesh is anything within Unreal Engine that has bones in it, essentially. There's skeletal meshes and there's static meshes. Now, skeletal meshes, historically within Unreal Engine, so going back to at least Unreal Engine 3, and I'm assuming previous versions, Light using a separate method, right? It's kind of optimized for deforming meshes, whereas anything static is optimized for meshes that don't move. Now, in Unreal Engine, there's actually some kind of wiggle room for static meshes that can move, and they kind of take static meshes and kind of use a similar process to skeletal meshes for the lighting on those things. You don't really notice the difference anymore. Unreal Engine 3, you actually did notice the difference, but Unreal Engine 4 is a lot better at handling all that. So we want to import the mesh, leave just about everything at default. Definitely bring in an animation. If you're like me, I animate everything at 24 frames per second, especially if I'm doing cinematics. If you're doing stuff for games, you're going to want to use 30. Unreal Engine kind of expects that. And so if you want to do the conversion, you can click that here. I wouldn't recommend it, only because I'm not 100% sure the animation will play at the correct speed. It might, but you never know. Convert scene, yes. Materials, again, we're not going to worry too much about materials. I'm just going to import them so we can see the assets load in. And then just down here is your FBX file information. Kind of shows, what your formatting is, and it just gives you, the information that you might need for, some, bug, debugging issues. And so we just click import. You can click import all as well if you want, but I think that's really only matters if there's like multiple animations stacked within the FBX file. But Lightwave doesn't really handle animation that way, so I don't think that matters. I've never really noticed a difference between the two. You will notice that things, like baking materials, not even baking, like just processing the materials and stuff when you change them will take some time. Loading things in will take some time. And I believe the reason for that is that Unreal Engine has to not only convert things to its own format, but anything like images and stuff like that, if you import a PNG file, it will cease being a PNG file once it's brought in. It will be recompressed under its own specific format. But what we have here is, these are our materials right here. Usually in Unreal Engine, you're going to want to use little suffixes at the end of all your like materials and textures and all that kind of stuff, because Unreal Engine doesn't support duplicate names of anything. So if it's like you have, fortunately in this case, obviously it brings in the name of the asset is the FBX file name. So like any kind of like material, so it's not bringing in the name of the robot from the Lightwave object file, because theoretically, if I had like just a robot material and the object file was named robot in Lightwave, there would be a conflict there if it did that. So fortunately, in this particular scenario, we're not going to have any of those conflicts. But another reason why you wouldn't necessarily want to end up using materials here is because there could be some naming conflicts. So you either have to rename them or make your own from scratch anyway. Next, what we have is the actual skeletal mesh itself, and we'll just load that in. and it's in the base pose that it took from the FBX file, which is frame 0. Now, normally what you would do is you would not import your first your mesh with any kind of animation. Everything would be as defaults. We're not doing that here specifically because I'm not making a game character. We're just showing how to import the animation by itself. So normally it would come in probably in its T pose, or whatever your base pose is for your rig. But also here you can see all your where all your materials plug in. Again, that's a deviation from how Lightwave handles materials, where similar to like 3D Studio Max, your mesh has slots where your materials, which are separate assets, get plugged into. And you can swap these out for any other material. We'll cover that in the next video, but more in depth. But I just wanted to kind of show you that's where that's going to happen. And you can also jump between your different these assets down here. You can also jump between them here, but I'm just going to close this and open up each one individually. So let's go ahead, and this is going to be our animation itself. So animations, again, are handled as a separate asset. I don't know if I noticed that or mentioned that in this take or not, but as you can see, the animations here, the neck's working. Once it loops, you kind of see it again. So our targeting rig here is working as if they were all bones, and if we go into the skeleton here, you can see we have all our bones here that used to be nulls. And so Unreal Engine just understands that nulls are going to be converted into bones. And we also have, and we're not really going to cover it at all in this video series, but you have your physics rig as well. And it basically takes every bone and puts like a capsule over it. And the default, I'm only mentioning it now because there's probably going to be a time where you're going to have to edit this, and so you know where it is. But this is how it comes in by default. And when you compile or you execute your game, if you're at all using this this physics collision shapes, you might have problems unless you go in and fix it. But by default, this is how Unreal Engine handles collision detections on skeletal meshes. You theoretically could have it use the geometry itself. Obviously, that's going to be more performance intensive. So unless you're doing like a cinematic specific thing, you're going to be using this. And that's pretty much it for the assets. I know this is probably going to scare some people here with I only had one object with some animation, and I have all these assets. What I normally do is I'll move these to subfolders and whatnot, and have another subfolder for my textures. Again, gonna cover that in the next video. For now, all we're gonna really wrap up in this video is just applying your animation to your character in your game world. So I went ahead and just dragged him in there. Just hold down the mouse button, drag it in, just like moving a file. With the object selected, as you can see its name here. You can see some previous versions that still had references in the scene. But let's get rid of those for the sake of preventing confusion. So with the object selected, you can see it in your world outliner here. Under Details, in the Animation section here, you can drop that down to get a few more items that are in this particular list, but we're really only going to be, for now, worried about Use Animation Mode, and by default, it's Use Animation Blueprint. Now, what a blueprint is a means of applying visual scripting, like node-based code. So very much similar to how you would texture using nodes. You can code with nodes in Unreal Engine. You can also use C++. But a blueprint is essentially a container that can hold a mesh. It can hold lights. It can hold all the different components that you might want for a character or any entity that you bring into the game. And it can also, and mostly, it has what we call blueprint code, or just blueprint. So it's stuff you can execute at runtime. But we're not going to do that right now. We're going to switch it to use animation asset. And right here's our animation asset that we're just looking at. You can select it also from this drop-down list, or while this is selected, you can hit this little arrow here and it'll automatically just assign it based on what you have selected. That's my preferred way. But you can also, especially if you have a large list here and you have a large list here, you can literally just start typing its name in the search assets. That's one thing Unreal Engine is really great at, and it's one of those things that I'd really love Lightwave to kind of pull from. Is the ability to, like, you know, right-click and search, like if you're doing like materials or whatever, you know, like being able to search through Unreal Engine is just so easy and it's so helpful. But now that we have our animation applied here, you can simulate. By default, selected viewport is here, but for this case, we're just going to simulate here. So this little drop-down caret here, hit simulate, and now we have our character animation playing within our game level. Alright, but say you're just doing a cinematic, and say you want the animation to start at a specific time rather than just as soon as the level starts. Because remember, if you've got a game or whatever, you know, there's going to be some time between when the code actually starts executing and when you're actually starting to look at something. So let's go ahead and reset this to default. So, any of these caret will return symbols here will return whatever setting you click that on to its default default position, or whatever you want to call it, default setting. And so I've clicked that, so now this is back to saying use animation, or use animation blueprint. So we're going to right click in our content browser again under animation. We're going to select level sequence, and we're going to give it a custom name. Lightwave to Unreal Engine, and you can call it whatever you want, obviously, but that will open up Unreal Engine's cinematic tool. It's kind of non-linear video editor. It's kind of like editing in Adobe Premiere or After Effects. It's pretty straightforward. So we're just gonna, you know, drag it in from our world outliner to here, and very similar to here, it gives us the option to add animation, and now we have our animation in here. You can play it. In this case, we're playing backwards because I clicked the wrong thing. Now, by default, you probably won't have these transport controls, so let me show you how to add that. Under viewport type, by default, you're going to have, it's going to look like this. But you can go back to that and switch it over to cinematic mode, and that will give you your frame aspect when you have your camera in there, and it'll give you your transport controls and allow you to do things like loop your animation. So let's go ahead and just create a camera and just kind of set this up as if it were a shot real quick. So I've clicked on this little camera icon. It brings up the cinematic camera for Unreal Engine. Everything got blurry here because by default it has depth of field on. And its depth of field settings are very similar to actual film lenses, and respond, you know, appropriately. And so that's something you might want to keep in mind, especially if you are not aware of, you know, different lens settings and all that kind of jazz. It's probably something you should learn. All right, so let's go ahead and just kind of position our camera here. Much like in After Effects, setting a keyframe. And we'll just move that keyframe to the beginning. and we're going to change our focal distance setting. By default, it's set to like some sort of crazy number, and we're going to bring that down till this is in focus. Let's kind of reorient our camera here again. Just double make sure that keyframe's there. And when we hit spacebar to hit play, and extend our output to where the animation actually is. And extend our camera cuts. So you can have multiple cameras and cut between them up here, and that's what that is. So I just extended that out so it fit the length of the animation. Looks like we're out of focus again. There we go. And of course, you can animate your camera in here. I can't remember if I mentioned it at the start of the video, but currently I'm having trouble getting cameras to import. I've done it in the past with some issues, but it worked. Currently, I can't get Sequencer to recognize the cameras at all. And I tried going back to the old cinematic tool prior to Sequencer, and it also is not pulling Lightwave cameras in. I don't know if that's an Unreal Engine bug or if that's a Lightwave bug. I'm assuming that there was a change in Unreal Engine that prevented that from carrying over. So, New Tech, if you're watching this, I don't know if that's something you guys can resolve on your end or not. It may be something you've already resolved in Lightwave 2019, but because I don't have it, I don't know if it's working there or not. So that's pretty much it for now. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I want to make sure that you know that since my YouTube channel is small, every bit of attention that it gets is good. So if you could please like and subscribe, like the video and subscribe to the channel, it would help me out a lot. The next video is going to be on handling Lightwave materials and kind of show you some things that is possible with that. Again, I want to kind of introduce people who may not already know to how Unreal Engine handles materials versus how people using Lightwave are accustomed to handling materials. And that should be fun. I really enjoy Unreal Engine's material editor, and I hope you will too. So again, thank you all for watching. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.